questions whir in our brains. Mine has been pondering recently. What is cyberpunk? In terms of science fiction, I rarely wonder what's beyond our planet and stuff like space, rockets or aliens. I'm perfectly comfortable with my feet planted here on the ground, thank you. Instead, I am drawn to the development of humankind, the exploration of technology, and specifically the past's views and predictions of the future. A future we are currently living in. By the 90s, the vehicle for exploration was no longer the rocket ship, but the computer. The computer age was altering society at a breakneck pace, speeding towards the millennium. However, like most things, not everyone felt quite so positive. Amidst global tensions being high, rebellious ideas arose, plus experiments against mainstream tradition. A tunnel vision for a potential reconfigured world and a fascination for technology. The organic versus electronic, human versus machine. A whole new dimension of human communication was brought into existence, a world that now exists at our fingertips. Cyberpunk was a huge phenomenon, but some say it died when it started. In the book, The Big Book of Cyberpunk, it says, "Science fiction looks to the stars, cyberpunk stares into a mirror." And also here's an excerpt about cyberpunk from an insert in Times magazine by Mondo 2000. Mondo 2000 being a leading cyberculture magazine from the mid-80s to the late 90s, co-founded by R.U. Sirius, a prominent figure in the scene. Cyberpunk, a late 20th century term pieced together from cybernetics and punk. Within this odd pairing lurks the essence of cyberpunk culture. Science fiction writer Bruce Sterling calls it an unholy alliance of the technical world with the underground of pop culture and street-level anarchy. And a cyberpunk journalist writes, the place where the world of science and art overlap, the intersection of the future and now. Some denizens would deny they are part of a movement at all, nevertheless cyberpunk may be the defining counterculture of the computer age. At the end of the insert, the final words, "For cyberpunks, pondering history is not as important as coming to terms with the future. Cyberpunks use technology to bridge the gulf between art and science. Most of all, they realise that if you don't control technology, it will control you. It is a lesson that will serve them and all of us well in the next century." Deep words to read in reflection in 2025. Anyway, let me retrace my steps for a moment, I'm getting ahead of myself. I watched Johnny Mnemonic back in June, and it immediately piqued my interest. Visually, it is cyberpunk. But after watching, I pondered, what is cyberpunk about? What does it all mean? Life is full of these complex questions. Looking past the low rating, I saw the poster and instantly knew the film was going to ooze style. It's this ridiculous yet charming tech-noir spectacle. A crazy Keanu Reeves performance taking place in a world threatened by plague, where resistances rise with elite agents that smuggle data via brain implants. The info wars, everybody. This film dug its way deep into my mind. The more I then looked into the growth of cyberpunk, the more I realised its complexity. Cyberpunk looks at the change humans bring upon themselves, whether that's progress or regress, how humans react to technology and how we can't quite keep up with its pace or scale, how the genre continues on in its own way because the themes are a lot more relatable and visible since its height in the 80s, and how derivatives emerged like steampunk, biopunk, dieselpunk, and lots of other punks. Humans are drawn to punk, it seems. I have never properly delved into cultural theory, social theory, postmodernism, or even philosophy before, but these are the exact themes and topics I stumbled upon, and frankly, it was fascinating. And disorientating. Personally, it was easy for me to think of cyberpunk as just an aesthetic or style, something edgy and cool, tall buildings, neon lights, computers, robots, but its layers are deep. Cyberpunk looks at how the present has a hold on the future. It's about inevitability. The name William Gibson. If you know, you know, but if not, he sold millions upon millions of copies of his book Neuromancer, book 1 in the Sprawl trilogy, which is set in a dystopic yet highly technical world. In the book Storming the Reality Studio, it says, both disturbing and playful, Gibson also explores much deeper questions about the enormous impact of technology on the definition of what it means to be human. Of course, cyberpunk didn't show up out of nowhere. It developed. Genres shape themselves from the creators that are willing enough to put their ideas out there. The term cybernetics has been around since the 40s. The 50s brought optimistic ideas of robots completing chores in our homes. There are many forerunners to the genre, including Frankenstein, Red Harvest, Naked Lunch, The Gutenberg Galaxy, A Clockwork Orange, Philip K. Dick, etc. Then entered the world of cyberpunk with Neuromancer. Cyberpunk grew from literature, and it was quite a controversial phenomenon, may I add. Neuromancer spread by word of mouth and sparked numerous debates in the sci-fi community. Cyberpunk, in author Pat Cadigan's words, has never shied away from asking the next question. Writer Bruce Bethke states, in the 80s, science fiction had become self-referential metafiction, just a resharing of old ideas. So came the chance for change. Cyberpunk was originally written at the height of the Cold War, about anti-heroes speaking up against the horrors of their generation. In his words, he believes that cyberpunk is stuck in the 80s, glory days until 1986, briefly awakened by the Matrix, only to die again. The word cyberpunk itself comes from Bethke, whose short story amply named cyberpunk led to the initial use of the term. The word was simply a mixture between teenage punk attitudes and high technology. It wasn't until Neuromancer and also Blade Runner that cyberpunk as a subgenre became a more coherent, tangible thing. William Gibson coined the term cyberspace by being the first to use it in fiction with his story Burning Chrome. Neuromancer specifically caused the genre to skyrocket though, and it provided powerful visions that inspired hackers and scientists alike, even NASA.
The kind of cyberspace that he describes is really something that will be very helpful for all of us to be involved in.
Not sure if William Gibson anticipated that. He even said my ignorance of computers allowed me to romanticize them. Like what I've said in the video before, limitation equals imagination, and therefore Gibson did not feel at all hindered by what was and wasn't possible, and he created this bountiful technological universe pulled straight from his mind. He defined cyberspace as a consensual hallucination, a disembodied consciousness otherwise known as virtual reality. Cyberspace is a global computer network of information which Gibson calls the Matrix, which operators can jack in via a computer terminal. Sound familiar? Gibsonian cyberspace also allows for highly realistic interactions between representations of operators, or what Stevenson's 1992 book Snow Crash terms as avatars. Snow Crash came up with the concept of metaverse, where people live large portions of their life in virtual environments, which inspired games like Second Life.
I do believe that there's a pervasive cultural fear that we have today that we are being wrenched out of the natural world and essentially being booted into some very powerful and very artificial realm. It produces the same sort of ecstasy and dread that people feel when they actually look at how they're living.
Cyberpunk represented both a promise and a warning. Written in a book on cyberspace in 1995, it says, computer technology was developed to promote and speed up global communication, and yet somehow the effect is one of disconnection and distance. I feel that. We can be blinded by technology's ability to give us an instant means of escape, but on the contrary, sometimes we can't escape from that technology. Whether we want to digest it or not, there's relentless advertising, artificial intelligence, algorithms. As William Gibson said, internet is a global prosthetic extension of human consciousness. Where literature thrived, many cyberpunk films, such as Blade Runner, flopped upon release, others like Johnny Mnemonic and Tron included. Even though I am not completely knowledgeable in the origins of cyberpunk or new wave science fiction, I can see it wasn't just flashy technology. It accelerated culture and caused rapid social changes that could hardly be anticipated. I look upon the 90s with fondness, for it was an era I was born into. Even if I am blinded by nostalgia, the 90s brings forth a comfort I embrace. An era where technology hadn't completely dominated lives and there were same amounts excitement and fear over what it could become. Dizzying amounts of visualizations and possibilities, and it makes sense to me that I would specifically want to look into the 90s and the media that emerged at that time. Cyberpunk came from social, economical and political concerns. The original writers were of the same generation, prone to similar cultural influences including politics and music. But media reflects the times. Genres come and go, adapt, grow, evolve, so Cyberpunk, at least from its originators, seems to have been fairly short-lived, even though we now have Cyberpunk 2077 and Blade Runner 2049 with Ken. Neon lights, dark cities, Asian lettering, trench coats, even though cool don't solely equal cyberpunk, which was a surprise to me, initially, truth be told. But every single time I read something, watched a video or film, my view and perspective on the genre developed. I learned. The mid-90s saw this huge growth of personal computing. The World Wide Web opened to the public in 1993, and it comes as no surprise that movie studios were keen to get involved with the hype. It was the hot topic. It was often discussed during the growth of the internet that in this new techno-reality, identity will be a matter of freedom and choice. In the ultimate artificial reality, physical appearance will be completely composable, and identities can be selected or discarded almost at will, as in a game or a fiction. And what is the internet now if not a space to hide your true self and to present or perform in a way that you wish to be perceived? We can hide ourselves behind a screen, behind carefully selected words and pictures. Are we being less genuine when this happens, less true to ourselves? Or is it merely a freedom humans deserve? What came with all these new digital realms was new ways to conduct explorations of reality, to the point of experiencing an existential crisis, which I apologise for if you're still with me. For example, if within a simulated world, the simulated creations have memories, connections, feel pain and emotion, are they just as real as the ones who created them? The 13th Floor, based on the book Simulacra 3, plays with that kind of question. This film made my brain hurt in a weird, emotional way. It made me think about reality a bit too much. French philosopher Jean Baudrillard particularly discussed reality and simulation blurring together. He came up with the ideas of simulacrum and hyperreality, i.e. the more than real or so real you don't know it's fake sort of thing. As in, simulations of the real have utterly replaced the real. So, the 13th Floor was very overshadowed by none other than The Matrix. To be honest, The Matrix affected and popularised a lot of things, including Keanu Reeves. The Matrix tells the story of a computer hacker who joins a group of underground insurgents fighting the vast and powerful computers who now rule the Earth. Thanks, Letterboxd. Even William Gibson stated when I began to write Neuromancer there was no cyberpunk. The Matrix is arguably the ultimate cyberpunk artifact. The makers of The Matrix were drawing through a pre-existing cyberpunk aesthetic, which constituted as much of a found object for them as science fiction did for me. William Gibson liked The Matrix, whereas Jean Baudrillard did not. Even though the film features his book and is heavily inspired by his book, he felt the film misrepresented his hypothesis. Each to their own, I guess. The Matrix is seen as philosophical, or at least a lot of philosophers have discussed and written about it. There are books upon books on the themes of simulacra, authenticity, memory hacking, self-image, etc.
I had to read Baudrillard, I had to read Out of Control, which was about systems, evolution, robots. And then there was another book which was Evolutionary Psychology. Those were 3 books that they wanted me to read before I even opened up the script.
Earlier attempts at portraying cyberspace leaned more towards the surreal, stylish and strange, whereas in The Matrix, cyberspace is reality. The theme of choice is quite prevalent. The protagonist, Neo, is faced with, fairly life-altering choices. Deciding between living with the harsh reality of the world or a fantastical computer-generated version of it. But in this case, the computer-generated version, i.e. The Matrix, has to exist blissfully unaware that any other reality does exist. Another character in the film, Cypher, regrets finding out the truth and wants to turn back, uttering the line, "Ignorance is bliss." Cypher is relatable, he didn't want to suffer anymore. Humans carry self-imposed limits. We can be afraid to break out of loops, scared of breaking free of ourselves. But belief equals possibility. To some people, perhaps letting a machine think and act for you is the dream. But thinking that way will limit you. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path, as Morpheus says. Changing your mindset isn't easy, but imagine what would happen if you broke free from your own limiting beliefs. I am prone to thinking that I am not in control of my own life, but my harsh reality is I am the only one putting constraints on myself. The mind is a powerful tool. In the Italian film Nirvana, a character in a video game gains self-awareness. Can you imagine the conflict you would feel if you realised that you're not actually in control of your own life? Would you just want yourself erased? Existence by David Cronenberg is another film where I believe characters find themselves inside a universe created by virtual reality. Unfortunately, I'm hesitant to watch that one because I'm not good with gross. I've seen Naked Lunch though. I've also been delving into Ralph Bakshi recently, yes, the one who made the animated version of The Lord of the Rings. He is a pioneer of adult animation. His work seems to be quite divisive among audiences, but I had no idea he had also created an adult cyberpunk style anthology animated series, which was fairly short-lived. The show isn't without its troublesome content, but like a lot of people say, it was very ahead of its time. In episode 1, for example, a couple of characters want to escape the real world by transferring themselves fully into the digital realm. The show features themes of virtual love, genetic engineering, curing imperfections, cloning, consequence, crime and corruption. Sticking around themes of virtual reality though, we have films like The Lawnmower Man. Originally this was an adaptation of a Stephen King story with his name plastered on the front, but he sued them due to there being no meaningful resemblance to his short story. I had a blast watching this one, especially the CGI. As someone who loves early computer graphics, it's simply a treat. To me, it's colourful, fun, surreal, it's its own unique universe. The extent at which they experimented with the visuals and potential of cyberspace and VR is admirable. The film essentially follows a scientist who experiments on a man to make him smarter via computer science, and how it's all a recipe for disaster. Once we feel we have power, even in a digital world, it shows how lost we can become within it, blinded by its potential. The potential for us to play God.
You become a god. You have the power to change reality. You have the power to create reality. When you look on the TV, and is anything you see real? Nobody knows anymore. With this technology, it lets me be a god, and it lets me create my reality.
In the 90s, there was this high-level fascination with thy virtual self and what it could mean. How much is your real self and your virtual self connected? The question sparks much thought. But also, I'm just happy we don't have to spin around in gyroscopes in order to access the internet. As William Gibson says in an interview, on the most basic level, computers in my books are simply a metaphor for human memory. I'm interested in the hows and whys of memory, the way it defines who and what we are. I was thinking about this too, funnily enough, after watching films like Dark City and Strange Days. In reality, memory itself is fleeting, unreliable, and ultimately dissolves. But we have easier access to cameras now, and I love filming things, I love photography, but recently I've tried to not let them take over my lived experience. In the book Cyberspace, Cyberbodies, Cyberpunk, the seemingly ubiquitous camcorder endlessly records not just the spectacle, but also the mundane, to such an extent that lived experience in and of itself becomes secondary to gaining a taped representation of it for later consumption. Social media has encouraged us to make and to share, to show whatever side of our lives we wish. We have the ability to store and showcase moments and memories of our choosing. It's quite the luxury. So like in the film Strange Days, what if we had memories as a possession to record, rewind, relive? But as said in the film, memories are meant to fade. They're designed that way for a reason, and that stuck with me. The film follows the use of a black market electronic device that allows users to experience recorded memories of people, plus the exact physical sensations they had at the time. Memories are purchasable and exchangeable, replaying them back potentially a pleasurable activity or a brutal one. It shows the dangers of escapism, particularly with keeping yourself stuck in the past or living someone else's reality. Our own personal memories shape us so much. They are part of who you are, even if it hurts sometimes. Dark City is a touch more on the noir side. It has amazing practically built structures and atmosphere, and it makes you think, are our memories and experiences what makes us human, or are we much more than that? The film prods you with many questions, such as, what is real? Who am I? Kind of like The Truman Show, but with much darker visuals. Humans are by nature uncontrollable, unpredictable, and any attempt to put us all into one box just would not work. We are self-aware beings, which begs the question, human versus machine? Where's the line? The emphasis on memories, whether conscious or unconscious, and relations with others then, are obvious marks of humanness in the cyborg film. Rewinding back a little to the 80s, RoboCop features a cop who gets involuntarily revived as a cyborg and is haunted by fragmented memories of his family and past. He battles to reassert his self-identity in a desire to break free of his new artificial constraints. In Blade Runner, regarded as a cult classic now despite its original failure, the replicants in humanity can be detected by revealing the lack of genuine memories from their childhood. Without knowing who we are, how can we know our place in the world? In Nemesis from 1992 as well, despite illegal androids and cybernetic components being normalised and everybody being on some sort of human-to-machine spectrum, the main character constantly feels torn about his own humanity. Also look at this scene where he shoots holes below him to go through multiple floors of a building. Look, you just have to appreciate the low-budget movies of the 90s, especially when they tried to incorporate cyberpunk themes or tech-noir or sci-fi. They have their own special vibe, which naturally comes out grittier. There's also hardware that has very cool cinematography dominated by the colour orange at the beginning. Oh, and you can't ignore the not-so-cool evil robot that wants to murder. Or perhaps Split Second, the film I am biased about because it is British and funny. It features big guns, rats, a heart-stealing creature, London submerged in water, and Rutger Hauer playing a cop who survives on anxiety, coffee and chocolate. Which, when that line was said, it hit me like a brick because that is literally me. Alongside self-identity, a lot of cyberpunk represents the fight lower classes or outcasts perform in order to reclaim their human nature and to not let people in power win. The need to rebel is intrinsic to the genre. And it makes sense. Rebels seek answers, information, rebelling against the wealthy in towering skyscrapers that literally look down upon the poor. Cyberpunk showcased rebels as a glimmer of hope, and naturally that included hackers. With the rise of technology brought a bigger world of hacking. There were real happenings, of course, such as the Max Headroom incident, a signal hijacking that took place in 1987 during an episode of Doctor Who. Max Headroom being an 80s British TV movie and an introduction to a TV series that broadcasted from 1985 to 1987. It focuses on TV networks, advertising ruling in a decaying world, and a character's mind being copied into a computer and into a digital head. Hacking enters the Hollywood mainstream is certainly an interesting sentence. In 1983 we had the film War Games, a film that popularised hacking and cybersecurity in media and even caused panic, and 1992 brought the film Sneakers. Then the internet grew substantially by the mid-90s, and what came with it was the ability to collaborate online and an underground subculture with its own ethics, rules and folklore.
Cyberpunks are many things. One thing they all have in common is the delight taken in the use of advanced technology against those who would try to restrict, direct, or control that technology.
After finding Raphael Moreau's script very appealing, Ian softly decided to make a film about hacker subculture, amply naming it Hackers, releasing in 1995. Raphael had gone to meetings and met real-life hackers at the time, many whom had been harassed by the government. Raphael said he was interested in subcultures at the point where they break through and become difficult for the mainstream culture to ignore. He included, "We're in a new era. This is uncharted territory, and I think hackers see themselves as modern-day explorers." The film Hackers overall to me is such a great statement on technology, human communication during the 90s, fashion, music, i.e. trance and rave being a big connection to cyberwave, and plus, they rollerblade everywhere. I adore that. I want to do that. The villain shows up on a skateboard. This is the world I want to live in. Funnily enough, the scenes within the computers and hackers were not made with computers themselves. Some people find hackers cheesy, but it's a 90s time machine flowing with important messages. It especially calls for a world where people aren't judged. The characters are constantly going after knowledge and information which reflected reality and what true cyberpunks were after at the time, brandishing themselves with phrases such as "information should be free" and "information is power." The same is featured in Billy Idol lyrics in the game Shadowrun. "Information is power" is even said in the film The Net, also from 1995, a time when there were not many solidified ideas of how the internet should work or look. The net represented horrors such as your identity being stolen and your information being taken and changed and used against you, even to fatal ends. Technophobia. On one end, the film is a nightmare, but on the other end it showcases important ways to utilise a computer, like for ordering a pizza. Oh, the wonderful world of the web. Cyberspace was presented as this hallucinogenic experience, which is unsurprising as cyberspace was often linked to the psychedelic world. Drug use is certainly not unheard of in the cyberpunk genre, and even during the 80s and 90s, talks were in flow about how humans could become smarter, calmer, stronger via substances. Timothy Leary, a prominent figure of counterculture and an advocate of psychedelic drug use, became a spokesperson for cyberpunks and claimed PC is the LSD of the 1990s. It gave people a space to be themselves. There was a lot of conversation around pushing humans beyond their natural limits. And it's not as out there as you may think. Humans, including myself, wear glasses in order to see better than one's eyes allow. That's pretty cool. There were genuine talks about how soon we could get computer chip brain implants or be able to download skills to our brains. We thought we could potentially bring this kind of evolution to humankind, no matter how dangerous. Japanese cyberpunk really showed the violent dangers of transforming humankind. Combining flesh and metal, there was a lot of body horror imagery, like being infected with technology. It didn't shy away from showing technology as a disease, full to the brim with anxiety. Japanese media showed the punk in cyberpunk so strongly, inspired by the punk music scene, of course. The films are metallic, industrial, and experimental. Burst City, Tetsuo the Iron Man, Rubber's Lover, and 964 Pinocchio, they all feel so raw. Anime even is the same. Think about the avant-garde Serial Experiments Lane with its strong themes of paranoia and addiction, and Akira about rebellious youth in post-apocalyptic Tokyo, which also features body horror elements. Compared to Western cyberpunk, Japanese cyberpunk felt way more like a nightmare. It seems anime took over by the late 90s with Ghost in the Shell especially, but unfortunately I don't think I'm super qualified to talk about Japanese cyberpunk more than this right now, but it has pulled me in and I certainly want to learn more. The whole world of cyberpunk is hypnotizing. Returning to Johnny Mnemonic now, despite the problems it had during production, I just adore it so deeply. I find it rare that you get the city feel of Blade Runner, or the gritty technology, the dystopian feel, computers hacking, the fashion, the vibes, a dolphin, William Gibson's involvement, Takeshi Kitano, an AI lady, fire, people being sliced with lasers, gigabytes of data being stored in a human brain in such a way that it erases childhood memories in the process. Plus there's a black and white version too. I know its execution may not equal a masterpiece in a lot of people's eyes, but it is stylish and creative, and that makes it a top film in my books. I have really enjoyed the research so far, but what I realised is that it's never ending. It's a continuous learning experience, so I hope I can come back sometime with even more information and knowledge under my belt. Cyberpunk is fiction, but realistic. Brutally realistic. It embraces technology in an imperfect world. It can have a lot of negative connotations, but there are still glimmers of hope and happy endings, and I hope for our future we all have a happy ending.